And welcome to the July Development Committee. We only have one member of the public, but I will just repeat the one or two things that we normally say at this particular time. I'm Councillor Pauline Grove-Jones, and I normally chair this meeting of the Development Committee. And on my, up here on the top table, I have the officers who help with the presentation, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves. On my left, we have
Alice Walker.
And you are planning officer. And following on,
Colin Reuben, team leader in development management.
Amenity, Democratic Services Manager.
Fiona Croxton, solicitor to the council.
thank you.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the public. My name is Philip Bryson. I'm the Assistant Director of Planning here at North Norfolk.
And in front of me, this serried array of members, district councillors who are members of the committee. I just tell you that if you hear the fire alarm go, Mr. Fisk, this is for real. So just follow everybody else. Knowing these members, I hope they don't make a dash for the doors, but you never know. Just quietly exit and either go into the front of the building or the rear of the building. And please don't use the lift. And you will no doubt find that outside in the lobby there are facilities. Okay. If you have a mobile phone, anybody, because there's usually one in here who's got it switched on, please turn your mobile phones to silent or turn them off. If we're still here at 11 and we're liable to go on, we'll have a small coffee break, but I don't think it's going to be necessary today. Right. Now, if we can now go on to receive apologies for absence.
Received apologies from Councillor P. Heinrich, Councillor N. Pearce, and Councillor V. Holiday.
Any substitutes?
Yes, I have Councillor John Rest substituting for Councillor P. Heinrich.
Thank you. Now you have a copy of the minutes. I shan't go through them page by page. I'm assuming you have gone through them. Any mistakes or alterations? No, are we all clear with this? Can I have someone to approve? Richard Kershaw, and second, Peter Fisher. Thank you. Are we all in favour? That's it. Okay, fine. Items of urgent business. I do have an item of urgent business because Paul is winging his way back from America at this very moment. I need to elect a vice chair because for the first item, the Stalham item, I will vacate this chair and the vice chair will take over because I wish to speak. So I'm going to make a suggestion myself, if you don't mind, and I will propose that Andrew Brown is elected for the day as vice chair. Have I a seconder? Richard Kershaw. Can I have a vote? All those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you. So as we get near this, I will shuffle out one way and Andrew will shuffle back the other. Right. Order of business, well, really, it's just as it stands. And any declarations of interest? Well, obviously mine because it's in my ward, and Matthew because it's in his ward, and Angie because of
Overstrand is in my ward.
Right. Anybody else? Now, I shall stand down at this point as we now pass over to the applications, and as I called it in, and Councillor Brown will now take the chair. I'm going to shuffle past you, Fiona. Is that all right, Abby? Oh.
Right, good morning, everybody. So we move straight to agenda item 8 on page 17 of your papers. This is an application in Stalham, as we've heard, under reference PF 21/3389. And it's for a single and two-storey extensions to a dwelling to include an internal or attached annex at Lucinda House, Moor Lane, the Green, Stalham. I believe we have Alice to present this one. So if I can hand over to you, Alice, if you're ready, please go ahead.
Yeah, so this is an application PF 21/3389 for Lucinda House in Stalham. The application seeks permission for single and two-storey extensions to create an internal attached annex to the existing residential dwelling to allow space for the owners and their family to care for aging parents. Lucinda House is located on Moor Lane, which is just outside development boundary of Stalham and Stalham Green. In terms of representations, we received a letter of objection from Stalham Town Council. We also received late representation since the report was published, and we've now received a total of 12 public representations. 7 are in support of the application and 5 object. The 7 supporting comments gives full support. A late representation was also received from Norfolk Wildlife Trust, which raised no objection subject to condition. As referred to in the report, the proposed plans have been amended in the duration of the application. And the application was referred to committee by Councillor Grove Jones with concerns regarding the size of proposed extensions and compliance with HO8 and EN4. Just have a look through the slide. This is the wider context of the site. The application site is outlined in red. It's just adjacent to Stalham Fen, which the owners own a little part or a part of. Again, the application site a little bit closer, it shows Moor Lane and the location there. This is the aerial view of the property. This is the existing site plan of the property and Lucinda as it stands at the moment. This would be the proposed site plan, including the new extensions. These are the existing elevations for the property. The existing floor plans. These would be the proposed elevations. The north elevation there shows, at the top shows the 2 extensions at the rear. The proposed ground floor plan. The door, there's a connecting door from the dining room and there's another on the first floor for the annex. It shows a proposed roof plan, proposed sections. And this is the view as you approach Lucinda House, coming down Moor Lane from the west. Lucinda House looking north towards the application site, and photos of the rear garden where the extensions would be located. That's looking onto neighbouring boundaries. Okay, the key issues to discuss then are the principle of development and design and amenity. I'll also cover a little bit of landscape impact as well. So in terms of principle, policy SS, one of the core strategies sets out spatial strategy for the district and directs development to areas which have been identified as sustainable locations. Policy SS2 restricts development to that which requires a countryside location. The policy allows for extensions and alterations to existing residential properties, and given the scale and nature of the proposal, on balance, it's considered that it's acceptable in terms of principle in accordance with SS1 and SS2. In terms of design, the proposal seeks to create an internal attached annex to the main dwelling of being Lucinda House to provide additional accommodation, allowing the occupant's family to act as carers as they age. The design of the proposal is comprised of two elements: a single-storey pitched roof extension to the east of the elevation, which provides access and entry hall with a dining room and study, and two-story extensions on the north elevation, connected via a day room on the ground floor. The annex extension would be ancillary to the main dwelling and connected via a door in the dining room and another on the first floor. The plans have been revised slightly to reduce the scale of the extensions to be more in keeping with the host dwelling, and largely to improve the proposed development's relationship with the roof of the main dwelling. It removed a sort of an awkward juncture for flat roof. The pallet materials aim to match the existing. They are considered to be acceptable, and given the revisions made to the proposal, taking into account the context and including the large size of the plot, it's considered that the height, scale, and palette of materials would be acceptable, in keeping and proportionate to the existing property and its location. In terms of amenity, the property is set in a large plot and has an immediate neighbour to the west and neighbouring properties to the north and east. Concerns were raised that a first floor window on the north elevation may cause overlooking. However, given the significant separation distance between the dwellings to the northern boundary and the existing boundary treatments, which are sort of mature hedging and trees, although that would be visible, it's considered that it would not result in any significant negative amenity impacts in terms of overlooking, overbearing, or overshadowing, and is therefore acceptable in accordance with the North Norfolk strategy. Landscape concerns were also raised. Despite being within the countryside location, the property sits within a group of residential dwellings close to the development boundary of Stalham. The large elements of the proposed development would be confined to the rear garden of the property, and although visible, the site benefits from existing trees and landscaping. It's considered that any visual impact would be largely localized in nature and will not have a detrimental wider landscape impact. Landscape have raised no objections, subject to mitigation considerations, and Norfolk Wildlife Trust have also not raised any objection, subject to condition. In conclusion, it's not considered that the issues raised would justify refusal of the application, and therefore the recommendation for this application is approval for the reasons on the next slide. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I think at this point we perhaps ought to ask if anyone has any questions of Alice at this stage before we move to speakers, or if the Assistant Director for Planning wants to add anything to that presentation at this point.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think that's a comprehensive presentation. I'm very happy to proceed unless there are any other questions for officers from members.
Thank you. Any questions from members at this point before we move to speakers? No points of clarity. Thank you very much. Right, so we move to the slot where we deal with speaking from members of the public or the applicant. Mr. Fisk, I believe you want to address the committee. If you'd like to step forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Understood. Thank you very much. Confident, maybe not, but firstly, thank you very much for accepting me today. Good morning. My name is James Fisk. I'm the owner of Lucinda House. So it's quite daunting seeing your property up there like that. But I just wanted to set a bit of context, really. No technical talk from me. I'm not a planning specialist. But the reason for the extension is all about my parents. I moved my parents in during lockdown. They're elderly and they need my support. And I was lucky enough to give them a bit of support during lockdown. After lockdown, we agreed that actually we need to continue that support. So this application is really about trying to provide them something that I can look after them on one hand, but also give them a little bit of independence. So there was, from the objections raised, there was lots of sort of talk about this is a holiday home. It's not a holiday home. There is no intention, there's no plan for it to be a holiday home. This is purely about me supporting my parents. Other sort of issues that have been raised in the objection have been covered by a letter that I sent in. Appreciate that was last minute, but hopefully you will receive that. So hopefully I've been able to address all of the points there. In terms of obviously the size, it's now to accommodate seven people, as opposed to the two that previously lived at Lucinda House. And this is about providing my parents with something that will allow them to have their separate bedrooms because they don't sleep together, and being able to provide my three children with their own sort of property in terms of place to stay and bedroom accommodation. So I didn't have anything more to say than really what was covered in the letter. I'm here to cover any sort of questions that anybody has. But yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, this is not about trying to produce holiday homes or anything like that. This is purely about me trying to support my parents. So thank you for having me today, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fisk. If you'd like to return to your seat, thank you very much. I just want to deal with the emails that we've received from both Mr. Fisk and from an adjoining neighbour, which I think we've probably had on email. There are printed copies here, which I know some members have collected. So if we can just pause at this point for a few minutes to give everyone an opportunity to read through those emails before we move to the next stage. Sorry, I'll put my microphone on, which always helps. So I don't believe we have any town or parish speakers. We say town speaker in this instance. So I move to the local members. If I can ask Councillor Matthew Taylor, if you would like to speak, you have 5 minutes, as you know, Matthew.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I cannot find fault with the objectives of this application. I completely understand the applicant's desire to house their elderly parents close by and give them a pleasant space in which to live. Therefore, in theory, I would be completely supportive of this plan. I do, however, think it's right for me to raise the concerns of both the Town Council and other residents which have objected. I'm really just trying to get some clarification on the points that they have raised. I know, Mr. Fisk, you covered these in your letter, but if officers could maybe just give me that little bit extra reassurance on these points, I would be very grateful. The first point is the mention of a cart lodge. This is from a report dated January 2022. I know, Mr. Fisk, you said you have no intention of building a cart lodge, but I think the concern is that this point may become unenforceable should we proceed, as it's mentioned in reports, historic reports. The second point is the size. There is concern that it's just simply too big. As I say, if you could provide any reassurance on these 2 points, I would be very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of the cart lodge, there was a previous application that made reference to a cart lodge, and I believe that's when the tree report was commissioned. The tree report was updated. The application makes no reference of a cart lodge, and the plans within the updated tree report also have removed the cart lodge. I think it's just a couple of sentences where it's referred to. As it's not been applied for and as it's not part of the submitted plans, we're happy that that wouldn't be an issue, and it would need to be, you would need to get planning permission for that addition. In terms of the size, the plot is a very generous size, as you can see from the site plans, and therefore it would be able to support a much larger property without it being considered overdevelopment of the plot.
Does that address your concern, Matthew? Thank you very much. And if you've no further comments, I'll move to the other member for Stalin. Councillor Grove-Jones, would you like to?
Thank you. Before I start, Alice, have you got the overlays that Mr. Irving sent through of the size of the properties? Please, if you could just pop those up. There we are. So as you can see, oops, well, we did for a second get them there, just for a sec. And I think we go, just to explain this before we start, we go from the first presentation, which is the blue, I believe this is so, isn't it? The second application, which is the purple, and the final application, which is to the right, the green. And at the top, you've got the overlays of the original drawing and the extensions. Thank you. I'm ready to start now. You can start pinging me for me 5 minutes. Right? I brought this application to committee as this has been a difficult case to settle from the first plans put forward in 2020. Although officers feel that this present application does not contravene policy H08, I have to disagree. I consider the present plans to extend the original 19th century house to be overbearing and over large in relation to the existing plot. Although it is fairly generous, this does sit in a prominent position on the plot and the surrounding properties, which we do have some near neighbours. According to the current local plan, which we still have to adhere to, this property exists within the countryside. Policy H08 specifically states that extensions that are disproportionately large in height or scale should not be permitted. As you can see from the drawings supplied by Mr. Irving's letter, the email, the overall size has increased from 286.4 square meters to 412.4 square meters, which quantifies as a 44% increase in scale. The size of the extensions also seem to contravene policy EN4, where extensions should preferably be single or 1.5 stories in height. This plan shows two-story extensions, but they are actually placed at the rear of the building, as you can see here. I'm not going to say any more about this at the moment, but I am going to leave it to your considered judgment, members, to decide on this application. Thank you.
It is in fact. Thank you for that. So I move to other members who may wish to speak. Councillor Mancini Boyle and then Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little bit confused. On one hand, the officer is saying that it's okay, and the local council saying it's not. My question is, as Councillor Grove-Jones pointed out, HOA says would not result in disproportionately large increase in the height or scale of the original dwelling. My question is how did the officers come to that conclusion? And the second part of my question is, I've only seen a limited amount of houses in the area. Would this now be the largest development in the area, or are there equivalent properties have been extended within the area? Thank you.
Would you like to respond to that, Alice? As regards the comment?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. When looking at the size, we're obviously taking into account the size of the existing house that's there at the moment, and also the size of the plot that's there. Now, as we've already covered, the size of the plot is substantial. So yes, they are large extensions, but our considered view is the plot can easily take an extensions of that size. So we're very comfortable with the size of what's proposed. There is a degree of subservience to the extensions as well, as was shown on the plans. It's worth pointing out as well that policy H08 has 2 tests. So it talks about the extensions not being disproportionately large and not having a wider landscape impact. We do not feel as officers that they are disproportionately large given the size of the current house and given the size of the plot. And we also do not feel that there would be a wider detrimental landscape impact. So we feel it does easily comply with policy H08.
Thank you for that. My other question was, would this be the largest extension in the area? I know it's a tricky one.
I'm not entirely sure we've done a detailed analysis of the size of this compared to lots of other properties in the vicinity. Obviously, it's a case-by-case basis. On this particular plot, we feel it's appropriate. Yes, it would result in a large dwelling, but we have no issue with that in terms of the site context.
Thank you, Officer Rubin.
Councillor Lloyd and then Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'm pleased to see that the applicant worked with our planning officers to amend the plans and reach a satisfactory outcome for both parties. That's the sort of attitude we like to promote at NNDC, working together to a common good. Looking at this papers, it's a really large plot. I feel that it will easily accommodate the extensions without really impacting on anybody else. The distance between the neighbouring properties are large. I like the planting scheme. I've got one question about the annex restriction condition 4, and I'm assuming that refers to the fact that there's some sort of covenant over the fact that this has to remain as it is. Yeah, can you confirm that for me?
The annex restriction would ensure that the extensions remain ancillary to the main dwelling, and it would restrict the occupancy to family members of the owners.
Okay, thank you for that. Chair, I'm happy to propose acceptance of this scheme.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. I believe in the emerging local plan, consideration has to be given to elderly care. And I believe this falls into that description. Would you like to just enlarge on that for me, please?
I believe it does indeed, but obviously at this stage, the emerging local plan is afforded very limited weight at the moment.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Taking everything into consideration and listening to what everybody's saying, I think whilst it's a very difficult one, I am happy to second Councillor Loy's proposal for acceptance.
Thank you. If I can bring in before I come to you, Councillor Kershaw, the Assistant Director for Planning, Mr. Wilson.
I think it's sort of a reflection on the discussions that the members have had so far in debate, Chairman, if that's helpful, and the comments from our officers. It is true that we have an elderly demographic in our district. It is therefore true that there is an element of care that's required for those elderly people who are living in our district. And we may have, as in this case, elderly people who've come to join their family during the pandemic, and the family dynamic has changed. The planning policies themselves do allow some flexibility. When you look at some local plans, we have policies for dwellings in the countryside that say you are allowed X percentage increase in the scale of the development. Now, I've worked with those policies and I've lost appeals with the planning inspectorate where they've said, actually, this is a large plot. There is no harm to the landscape. The development and the scale of the dwelling can accommodate the scale of the extension, either for large families or people who are providing care and accommodation for the relatives, as in this case. So this position is not unknown in rural areas. As seasoned members of the Development Committee, you'll know that. What I'm here to say to you today is that this is a judgment call. It's a matter of planning judgment here that we're dealing with. Our officers have looked carefully at the size and scale of this dwelling. They've looked at the relationships to that dwelling and its surrounding neighbours, and they have applied the relevant policies and supplementary guidance. It's for you members today, having heard the debate and the discussions, to form that view. And it's understandable that local communities do have concerns about something being the biggest dwelling in the street. Will this be the biggest extension in the area? Sometimes, members, using your planning judgment, it's okay to allow the biggest dwelling in the street. Sometimes it's okay to allow the biggest extension, because our policies do allow for that. They don't set these areas in aspect. Unfortunately, members, it's for you today to decide, do you feel that the size and scale of this building are in keeping with the tests you've heard for HO8? And is it okay in design policy terms, EN4? Does it meet our supplementary guidance? You've heard from your ward members and you will make that decision. There is scope for either decision today, but our officers have assessed this very carefully and have arrived at a planning judgment where they believe under suitable conditions it can be approved. There we have it, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rowson. I move to you, Richard. Councillor Kershaw.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the application and the plans, yes, it's a sizable increase, but I'd be more concerned if the massing was on the front. I think the front elevation remains as per. I think it's sensitively done. I'm happy with the condition that the annex restriction remains within the family. So I think I'll second what Councillor Lloyd said it's very good to see the planning officers working with the applicants to resolve these issues. I think that's really is the way we should go forward, and I'm very happy with the planting. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Kershaw. From my own point of view, I do come across this, that people do view the extent of extensions to properties to sort of be limited to no more than 50%. Now, as I understand it, that's a rule that prevents you taking up the footprint of a site beyond 50%. It doesn't necessarily mean that the extension has to be less than 50%. I'm willing to be corrected if that isn't the case as regards the actual built extent of the property. And I agree, there is mitigation here in that the extensions are at the rear, not the side, or at the front of the property. And HO8, so policy HO8 is clearly a subjective test by the planning authority and the officer concerned dealing with the application. It isn't sort of subject to a mathematical restriction of being no greater than 50% as I understand it. So that said, with the reassurance that it will remain only for family use and therefore unlikely to be at any future point used for holiday letting or as a second home, I'm content to, I think, support the application on balance. Has anyone got anything else that they would like to raise at this point? Councillor, you see me?
Yes, I have very little to say really, because all the things that were floating in my mind have already been addressed. The main point that I had was the size, of course, but the excellent report by our officers, and indeed the image, the aerial image featuring the trees surrounding the property, put it into context. Taking that into account, I think it's okay. That's a good image, by the way. Good photography.
I think also a good image is the overlay. It's very clear. We don't always get that on this committee, and the overlay diagram is when I saw that, I almost thought we should tweak our validation process and insist that we have this every time. It's so helpful.
Yes, can I just add that I do respect it being brought in. It's with all due respect, and I've taken everything into account, and also the empathetic value of this entry. Even though it is not to do with planning, I'm an empathetic person, but that's not what swayed me. It is solely on what I have seen, on the balance, and within our, in accordance with our planning policies.
I think we've probably covered everything that we need to cover. So with everyone's indulgence, I would like to move to the vote. So we see the recommendation, which I think is set out on page 22 of the papers for approval, with a raft of conditions which are set out, which I think we've looked at and we're happy with. I think we need a recorded roll call vote. Emma, if you can.
Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, beg your pardon. I should really ask for a proposal.
You've got
which
a proposer.
is from Councillor Nigel Lloyd. I'm really sorry about that. Seconded by Councillor Fitch-Tillett. My apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. So members, I'll call your names out in turn, and if you can just indicate whether you're for, against or abstaining. So Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Fisher.
For.
Councillor Fitch-Tillett.
For.
Councillor Grove-Jones. Councillor Kershaw.
For.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
For.
Councillor Rest. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Varley.
For.
Councillor Withington.
For.
Councillor Yassimi.
of 4.
So Chairman, that is 10 in favour and 2 abstentions, so that's carried.
Sorry.
I think, Chairman, it would be sensible if I can update members on why this has been brought to you for a vote. We don't do many site visits, members. We try to keep them to an absolute required number during any year. If I can ask you to look at your agenda, your presentation pack today, you can see that in this case, we've got the Overstrand Garden Centre. Some members may already be familiar with the garden centre and its layout, but the aerial image is the first image I'd like you to take a look at. We're here to make a decision about a site visit today, not a decision on the application as it currently stands. So you can see the Munsley Road that runs through Overstrand, the main road through the village at the top of the site. You can see the existing garden centre layout that is immediately adjacent to Munsley Road and the garden centre buildings that then fall back from the road, quite an extensive complex of garden centre buildings and areas laying out where you can buy all that you need for your horticultural purposes. And then, members, if you could note at the back of the site, edged in red, is the application site. So this is an area where effectively goods storage, marshalling and car parking are proposed under this retrospective proposal. What you can also note, members, is along the right-hand side of the boundary is the access track that leads along the side of the garden centre and to this area of land. So if you then look at the picture below, you can see the site location, which runs through a diagrammatic of essentially what you've just seen in the overhead aerial view. What I'd also ask you to bear in mind, members, is the proximity of residents on the Lutchins Drive development, which sits immediately adjacent to the site boundary for the garden centre. Okay, moving on to the next plan that we show. This is the proposed site layout. And here, members, you can see the uses and the layout of the operations that are proposed for the garden centre. So you can see that there is a landscaped area edged in green. You can see that the palleted storage areas effectively form a horseshoe around the site boundaries, give or take the landscaped area that's obviously in place. And then you can also see the areas for car parking that are proposed. That's also for members of the public at busy times of the garden centre and staff. So those are the areas that the car parking will be provided in. You can also see, members, in the top left-hand corner of the plan, there is a proposed pedestrian link that takes the staff and visitors, customers to the garden centre backwards and forwards into the main body of the garden centre itself. So the plans themselves, members, show you what is proposed and its relationship to the near neighbours. Now, members, we have a significant issue here because the operation of the garden centre is causing a significant nuisance to the neighbours adjacent. I say significant, that's the words of the objectors to this application. That matter is of some significance and is of concern to our environmental health team. What we are proposing, if you visit the garden centre and the adjacent neighbours, then you will be able to judge for yourself before a decision is made on this application as to the veracity of those arguments. We won't see operation of plant or machinery on site, but what you will see is the juxtaposition of those properties, where the nearest sensitive receptors are, how the site can be laid out, and you can then make your decision in full view and understanding of how those sites operate next door to one another. I think if we were to bring the case forward without you visiting the site, you may be put in a difficult position where you're asked to make a matter of planning judgment without clearly understanding the scale, intensity of the operation and its relationship to the neighbours. So on that basis, Chairman, please can I propose that members agree a site visit. I think, Emma, we've got a date in the diary looking at the 21st of July from our run through.
I understand that the scheduled site visit date is the 28th, but that does cause some issues for members, so we're proposing the 21st, which is the reserve date for the committee.
Just a quick point. Clearly, for instance, a Monday would be a lot quieter than, say, a Saturday. So might I suggest we do the site visit on this busiest time, maybe Friday or Saturday? Because if you go on Monday or Tuesday, there's going to be probably half as many people turning up. So we need to see it when it's in peak use, I may suggest.
It's a Thursday. Yes, Richard, you want to say something there before I go to Angie?
Yeah, two things. I would imagine that deliveries with the HGVs are the noisier thing, which would tend to happen in the week rather than the weekend.
Yeah.
Similarly, I'm happy to visit, but the dates that are here, I'm away on annual leave, but I'd take a personal visit if that's appropriate. Thank you.
Anybody else before I pass to Angie? Right, Angie, wish to say, because this is, you are the local member for this.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm surprised and delighted that you considering visiting the garden centre in my village. I've called it in because there's all sorts of issues, environment, near neighbours that are relatively new, well, very new compared to the site. I obviously will speak an awful lot longer on hopefully the 21st, and welcome you to Poppyland.
Oh, thank you. Right. So we have a just to actually make you aware that we will not be using buses or coaches. You will be transporting yourselves, yes, either a long hike or a cycle or if you can, share cars.
If I could just make a small request, personal request. If we can do it relatively early in the morning, because I have to be at County Hall. Oh Lord, no, sorry, wrong one.
21st.
No, I have to be at Breckland District Council at 2:30 in the afternoon.
Yes, well, we did actually talk about this and we said about 10 o'clock would probably be.
That would be ideal.
Did you want to say something, Philip?
Chairman, just to clarify, the purpose of the site visit is really to familiarise yourself with the layout of the garden centre in terms of its proposal and its relationship to the neighbouring building. I think inevitably, if you were to visit the site on a quiet day, you would still see the layout of the things. If you visited it on a busy day, respectfully, your opinions may be skewed by the level of activity. The basis of the visit, the request for a member's visit, is to familiarise yourself with that layout. There will be a lot of information in the officer's report. We will include representation from the environmental protection team. There is supporting evidence from the applicant. There's a lot of information about the scale and intensivity of the use and its impact that you will be asked to consider. We'll make sure you have an environmental protection officer available to ask questions and update, and you'll obviously be able to speak to the operator of the garden centre and their representatives. The purpose of the visit, just to reiterate, is to see what the lie of the land is, to look at the relationships between those properties. I understand why you might want to see it in a busy stage or another stage, but it is really the site visit to look at the site and its relationships itself.
Thank you. Oh, yes, Andy?
So I'm right in saying that the meaning of this decision is to decide whether we go or not. It's simple as that,
Yes,
isn't
I'm
it?
going to ask.
So I would suggest we go.
You're going to propose the site visit?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a proposal from Councillor Seaman for
Yeah.
a site visit. Seconder, that's from Adam Barley. Seconded. I do believe that this will probably come forward as the application in September.
Chairman, we do have a meeting in August. I believe we may present in the August meeting. There are some issues that do need to be resolved between the applicant and officers. We are hopeful we can do that and still bring it forward in August. However, obviously that depends on the progress of those discussions and how quickly we can then turn them around. I believe we may bring it forward in August, but certainly September would be the full.
So we have a proposer and we have a seconder. Oh, sorry.
Just before we vote, I will have to give apologies as I'm on annual leave and will be on a beach somewhere.
That is not acceptable. Yes, if you are going to be away on leave or whatever, and you do know the area, just pop into the garden. So obviously you won't be able to wander. Well, you could wander around to the back because you parked the car. So we have a proposer, a seconder. Can I have a show of hands for approval to visit? You're against? Any against? And one abstention. So that is passed. I'll see you all on the 21st, God willing, at 10 o'clock. Thank you very much. Now we pass on swiftly to agenda item 10, the development management performance. Over to you, Philip.
Thank you, members. Just really looking at the headlines in terms of the figures, we are progressing with majors with an improvement in performance rising to 87.18% of decisions within the 2-year period in terms of timeliness. We are progressing with all decisions for majors at the time limit or within the time limit as agreed by the applicants and officers. So there is an increase in performance there, lifting to 87%. On non-major developments in terms of timeliness, we're holding a position at 79.64%, but I can tell you, members, that in the period over the last month that the officers were significantly in advance of that. They were producing decisions at 90% of all decisions either being within the 8-week period or within the agreed time limit period with the applicant. So the position, members, is that we're improving in terms of performance. I believe, Chairman, that we have a couple of difficult quarters coming up which are holding back the development management performance for non-majors at 79%, and that as those quarters move forward that arose from the introduction of our new software system, then I believe you'll actually begin to see that lower figure for non-majors rising to 90% plus, and that's certainly the aim and target that we're looking towards. In terms of appeal decisions, members, I can report our appeal decisions are significantly better than the benchmark set for national government. We are performing at around about 2% of decisions for major developments being overturned. That's for majors, and we are under 1% of all appeals in a 2-year period for non-majors being overturned by the planning inspectorate. So when you look at the quality of decision making, the performance remains exceptionally good, and that's because of the strong relationship between members and officers and the degree of trust, I believe, that exists between us both, Chairman. So looking at Section 106 obligations, you can see on the appendix attached that we are preparing to close 5 Section 106 agreements, and that those decisions will then be moving towards being issued. We will remove those Section 106 elements from the appendix the next time you see it, Chairman. And so there is progress being made. However, Chairman, I do have to reflect on nutrient neutrality at this stage. We can progress Section 106 agreements. We can be in a position to try to close these major decisions, but we will need to seek extensions of time because the nutrient neutrality mitigation will not be available in the early stage short-term mitigation much before August or September. And in terms of the wider scale mitigation under nutrient neutrality for those residential schemes affected, then those will be held back until we arrive in early 2023, when the nutrient neutrality mitigation will be finally modelled and available in February 23. So we will continue making progress with the Section 106 agreements, but we are still bound by the constraints of nutrient neutrality. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And I'd just like to say thank you to the staff, to your officers, because they have worked through very difficult times over this last 2 years or so. And it's a great privilege to work with you all. Sometimes we have a spat, but not very often.
I'll make sure they hear the good side of that, Chairman.
Now we go on to the, oh, sorry, yes, Richard.
If I might, it's just a vote of thanks for Mark Ashworth for presenting the nutrient neutrality paper to the Town and Parish Council Forum on Monday. It was well received, and thank you.
And Gerard, you wanted to say something, and then
yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick one, really. This nutrient neutrality dam at some point will burst. What provisions for staffing increases do we have planned, if any at all?
Through you, Chairman. We've got a service plan, and the service plan is set with the zero-based budgeting process in mind. So the short answer to the question, Chairman, is that we are continuing to make progress, as you've heard, with Section 106 is being completed, negotiations around applications being considered. There will be inevitably an uptick in the requirement to make those decisions. We might see more decisions coming to this development committee. There might be more requirements for officers to pitch in and work through those applications to progress them when we're able to make the decisions. But what I need to do, to be clear with you, Chairman, and our members today, is the officers aren't sat idle waiting for these things to progress. They are progressing the cases. Our customers want to see that progress. Where we can, we're moving things forward. So I think the important thing to say is we've got 2 key horizons coming up. Not straightforward answer, it's the best I can give you at the moment. As of August, Royal Asconi will be providing short-term mitigation measures and modelling. There'll be a new calculator that will be produced that will assist our applicants to bring forward their developments, perhaps in a more favourable way with less mitigation required. We have to settle that. And then, as I say, in February 23, we'll be in a situation where the wider modelling will be available. Will that demand more officers? At the moment, I don't know, Chairman. What we're doing is we're monitoring that, and we are managing the number of cases that are progressing and trying to agree extensions of time to do that. What we might see is we might see an uptick in appeals, we might see an uptick in challenges, we may see more work coming through in that way. If we need to do that, then there is the potential outside of the budgeting issues to look at short-term contracts of less than 2 years to bring in members of staff into the team to assist on a short-term basis. We're monitoring that, and at the moment, the short answer is I can't tell you because I don't know, but we are still progressing the applications as best we can.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's brilliant. Just a quick note, really. I'd just like to, Officer Rubin, some of the applications I've been looking at in my area just recently, they think he's a bit of a superstar. So I'd just like to mention that. It's better than the other way. Thank you.
I have to say that I do see a problem with staffing possibly coming up if we get all these applications coming through, because look what's happening at the moment. We're doing 1s and 2s. If there's going to be a backlog, so it'll all have to be discussed and worked out. And the short-term contracts have served us before, so it'd be interesting to see if they come through again. I think Andrew was next, and then Liz.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. So I speak in my new role as the portfolio holder for planning and enforcement, following Councillor Toy stepping back from that position. And just to say that for further comfort for Councillor Mancini Ball, that I'm sure we will be putting in contingency plans to cope with any upturn in applications when we hopefully resolve the embargo that we're subject to at the moment because of nutrient neutrality. But I just want to echo your comments, Madam Chairman, towards the department and thank them for the work that they have been doing and getting to grips with the new uniform system, which is never easy when a system changes. I know in my previous working life how that affects people. So well done for doing that. I think, as the Assistant Director of Planning has mentioned, the statistics for the planning performance do bear out that we work very well with our officers as a committee, and that we do uphold the standards of integrity between our respective roles, which is very pleasing to see. And finally, I'd just like to make a special mention of thanks actually to our solicitor Fiona Croxon for the work that she's done. It's very good work, demanding work on Section 106 agreements, and I would just like to put that on record, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much.
Yes, I fully agree with you there. Yes, and that sounds as if the rest of the members here of the committee basically agree with this with Fiona. Now, Liz.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a question to do with validation, please. From the little note at the bottom, it says that we have about 10% of applications are invalid. And I just wondered if any work's been done on what are the common causes of invalidity? Because obviously it's a workload for officers when they come in, and you've got to look at them and then send them all back again and then start again the next time. So it's obviously about reducing it. And I just wonder if anything's been looked at that. Is that a sort of standard expected figure, or?
I think there will always be an invalid.
There always will be.
But
So.
anyway, over to you.
I'm in the enviable position of being a planning officer who determines planning applications. I don't submit them. They're horrendous things to submit. They are supposed to be made more simple to bring forward. They're not. And 10% is actually a pretty good level. We are working to national validation levels at the moment, not local lists. We are looking to produce local lists that may rise, but what we need to do is we need to engage with our developers and agents in developer and agents forums, develop that local list and ensure that that's a local list that will enable us to make timely decisions and will be deliverable for local developers and agents. Great news, Chairman. We have a planning support manager recruited starting next week. The idea of looking at common causes for reasons for cases being invalid, what a good idea, Liz. You know, we can do that. That is something that the planning support manager can help us to do, can review, and can help to be that bridge between the service and our customers. And having someone who actually is actively managing that customer support role in a way which is their sole responsibility, largely their sole responsibility, will be really, really helpful to everybody in the service. Thanks, Chairman.
Is that all right?
Yes, it's good news. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Right. Thank you. We now go on to the appeals sections, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This is sort of falling under developing news, so bear with me as I go along. We'll look at the appeals at the top of the report. Obviously, you will see new appeals coming in Blakeney, North Walsham and Wells. Those are the early stages. Obviously, we are in a situation where we can look at those matters with the ward members and we can update ward members. There is a process that I'm looking at with the enforcement team in particular to ensure ward members are updated at key stages of enforcement investigations following our discussions at overview scrutiny. Next, to look at inquiries and hearings. Sit tight, please. First one up, Klein Ecstasy Arcading. Chairman, we were due to have a hearing appeal on the 22nd and 23rd of June. That was postponed. The appellant submitted a significant weight of late information on this case. The inspector did make some provision for information to be submitted in May of this year. Unfortunately, the level of information that came in was so significant, there were 15 additional documents that the district council were reporting back to the inspector and asking whether or not the inspector should be minded to expect so much late information to arrive on the eve of the hearing. The inspector reflected on that and decided that they should receive the information. But in receiving the information, they decided that it was appropriate to postpone the appeal hearing because it was right that the third party, members of the public, our communities, should have time to consider this information ahead of the appeal, make their written representations to the planning inspectorate, and also the district council and our local members should have a reasonable period of time to submit responses to this detailed and lengthy submission from the appellant. Long story, but we were cancelled on the 22nd and 23rd of June. Subsequently, the planning inspectorate asked the appellant and ourselves to try and agree a date. We did. We agreed a date in November after much toing and froing with council and consultants and everybody else involved. We even secured a room for it in November, Chairman. We responded to the planning inspectorate, and this morning they've come back telling us that they can't find the inspector's availability ahead of January 2023. I'm appalled, really disappointed, and we will reflect that in a letter to the planning inspectorate. I'm not least appalled because the community themselves require answers on this case, and the appellant also is living in jeopardy. They don't know what is going to happen. They face having the demolition of their house. I don't know quite why the inspectorate is delaying and delaying, but we will find answers and I will report to you. But the likelihood, Chairman, is today that we will be looking at a date in January 2023. So I will have to start the circus again. I'll have to contact our consultants, counsel. I'll have to contact the appellant, and they will have to go through that process with their team as well. And we will have to see whether or not we can all dance around and accommodate the inspector in January.
Can I just ask, because it does concern me, the costs of all this? Who is bearing the costs? Whoever, I mean, it must be horrendous.
The cost, Chairman, of the delay in this second instance, which arose as a result of the appellant submitting significant levels of information, is a matter for us to consider as to whether or not it was reasonable to submit that information. We'll go through that process with our appeal team, and we will make a decision and see whether or not that was a reasonable delay. The first delay from March 22 was on the basis of trying to agree, sorry, that should be March 21 actually, should be on the basis of trying to agree that there was a way forward without having to demolish the house. Now, that was an agreed position between all parties, and as you know, this committee voted on that decision and said that the remediation schemes were inappropriate. I can tell you that those will be conjoined in the January appeal hearing, and we will finally get a decision on the enforcement and the planning appeal decisions on the planning applications, or I believe we will. But yes, Chairman, there is a cost to all of this. We are having to review and assess this information. We don't have the capacity within the wider planning team to take on complex issues such as this and to continue supporting them, Chairman. So there is a cost to the public purse to do this.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to say anything about that one? I think we've actually said all before. Right, any other wish to mention? Philip?
Just a note at the end section, Chairman, decisions, good outcomes. We have decisions across 4 appeals in Aldeburgh, which was dismissed, in Kettlestone, which was dismissed, second one in Kettlestone, largely the same issues, dismissed, and then finally the appeal in Ryborough, which was a enforcement hearing appeal, which was also dismissed. So we've got a significant rate of success there in terms of appeal decisions where the council has defended its position successfully.
I must say that we do seem to have a very good record for our appeals that we win. And again, thanks very much to everybody, because that's very hard, putting forward appeal. The process is difficult enough, but also having to attend the appeals or write a report. Well done, everybody. Now we pass on to 12, exclusion of press and public. We don't have any here, so that's fine. Private business, any urgent exempt business? No, nothing at all. And no, number 14, exempt matters. So I now